All right, we are back with part 2 of Calvo's questions, covering questions 5 through 10. This will be the conclusion of my reading of my answers to Almando's questions, which so far are very good, and I really appreciate them. They're serious questions, and I'm doing what I can to give them serious answers. Question 5. Can you explain the existence of the universe without God? As put, this question could be taken to subtly imply that God is the default answer, to be believed in the absence of an alternative. I don't think that's intentional, but I want to make clear that I don't accept that. All explanations must be supported, and no answer wins by default. The lack of an adequately supported explanation means there's an empty space waiting to be filled in the future, and then only with lead, not ink. The range of possible options does not include only God or whatever I propose. To think it must would be a failure of imagination. The total range is infinite, to be constrained by evidence as humanity investigates the question. It's important to state this clearly because the question is often posed to imply a dichotomy between the monotheistic answer and the scientific one. There's not just one monotheistic answer or one scientific answer, and there are many other proposed answers which fit into neither category, along with innumerable others not yet, and perhaps never to be, proposed. From the perspective of we North Americans in a still relatively homogeneous culture, it can be difficult to appreciate the true breadth of human thought. Monotheism and modern science do not form a binary, standing alone in a void free of alternatives. They're surrounded on all sides by radically different systems of ideas, some still held and some long vanished, many referring to gods or godlike entities and many not, each with their own arguments supporting them, and all equally obvious to those who accept them as ours are to us. The future will bring new ideas that everyone who has yet lived would find utterly alien. As long as humanity lives, history cannot be at an end. Before I discuss my own opinions, I want to clarify the relationship between atheism and science. Scientific cosmological theories are not atheistic or theistic. They're more properly thought of as mathematical. Both theists and atheists have tried to claim that these theories support their side, because anyone can find a way to take any theory explaining the current evidence and creatively interpret it to fit any view. There are limits to this flexibility, such as trying to fit the evidence to a 6,000-year-old universe, but the scientific outlook is not directly adversarial to Christianity or theism, and only becomes a problem when the believers choose to make it one. Atheism is not science and does not depend on science. The idea that there's any relationship between them at all comes from the reaction of Christians to a few scientific advancements over the past few centuries, which awkwardly merged those topics into the God debate. A huge number of atheists are not scientifically minded, and many believe in the supernatural. I am not one of those supernaturalist atheists. I'm firmly an ontological naturalist and a physicalist, and I expect answers to questions about the universe, biology, the mind, and so on to be scientifically based. At this point, I think it's worth addressing your interpretation of the scientific understanding of cosmological origins. The beginning of Chapter 5, Once Upon a Time, of your book A Conscious Universe, presents what's supposed to be a non-theistic scientific view of cosmological origins, as if it were a fairy tale. I'll address it piece by piece in comparison to my understanding of the current scientific consensus. In the midst of darkness, before anything existed, nothing in cosmology posits a dark void without light. This implies space-time beyond the universe where light could exist, which is not demonstrated. Conceptually, space-time is the geometry of the universe, in which case there being more of the universe beyond the universe would be surprising. A small speck of heat energy began to grow in mass. Small implies a size within spacetime, but the speck is spacetime itself. It contains energy, but is not energy. Shaking with force, it started absorbing magnetic energy. There's no reason to think that spacetime shook from any force. Prior to spacetime beginning to expand, the forces wouldn't exist. And I can't see how it makes sense conceptually for spacetime to shake. Magnetism would not have existed prior to expansion, nor would there be anything to absorb this energy from. Until it reached a point of complete pressure. Pressure is not relevant here. And then, boom, exploding into many cells. The word cells generally refers to biological structures. I don't understand what it refers to here if not that. Boom and exploding are inappropriate because an explosion is usually understood to be a rapid expansion of matter and energy. This is instead an expansion of space-time itself. Like how if you drew dots on a balloon and then inflated it, the dots would move apart. The unleashing of gravitational force began drawing particles together, creating planets and stars. This is acceptable, although many other processes would have occurred before this, resulting in atomic matter that would be necessary to have stars, and later planets containing higher elements derived from nucleosynthesis in the deaths of those stars. The mass of heat energy enlarged into a star called the Sun. This seems to imply that the Sun is an enlargement of the pre-expansion heat energy spec, which was supposed to have already exploded, resulting in the entire universe. This has a whiff of heliocentrism, the idea that the Sun is at the center of the universe. I can't tell if that's intentional. Pulling each planet to its orbital space, each planet took its own place in the solar system. The planets would have been formed gravitationally from the same rotating accretion disk which formed the Sun. They were not formed elsewhere and then pulled into place. As particles continued coming together, a body of land and water formed from the gravitational push and pull, creating a planet for life. A charitable reading can make this acceptable, but to be clear, the land masses are not primarily the result of gravitational push and pull from, I assume, the moon or sun. There was no predetermined outcome of creating a planet for life. As each cell navigated the mass structure, every cell began latching onto one another, evolving into living, conscious creatures. This seems to refer to the same cells that resulted from the explosion, in which case I'm unclear on what exactly is being proposed. Towards the end of this summary, you say that according to this, the universe came from the pits of nothingness. This is inconsistent with your own statement that it came from a small speck of heat energy in the midst of darkness, being affected by some external magnetic energy. None of which are nothing, the first and third being energy, and the second implying spacetime. This is only a very basic summary of a few ways your understanding of these ideas is flawed. It's important to consider why and how such an extreme misalignment happened. Are these misunderstandings based on something you've heard? From whom? What might have motivated this source to misrepresent essentially every aspect of origins research? I would not recommend treating this source as an authority in the future. Now I want to make clear some things that I do and do not believe. I don't believe anything like that fairy tale. I don't think anyone does. I don't believe the universe came from nothing, and definitely not the kind of literal, absolute nothing that Christians tend to think of when they hear the word. Like Christians, I believe that reality always contained something. You believe it was God, who eventually created physical something ex nihilo. Well, I believe there was no ex nihilo origin of anything, and the physical something was always there in some form. I take the first law of thermodynamics seriously in this regard, at least until I'm presented with some reason not to. As you said in God is, ex nihilo nihil fit, a phrase that refers to the creatio ex materia thinking of the Greeks, which I find more compelling than the Christian view. I do believe that cosmological models are good, primarily mathematical models explaining the currently available evidence, with strong predictive success. I believe that cosmology is a rapidly changing field, and that aspects of the models will change, and already do change regularly to accommodate new evidence. Humans have only been knowingly observing other galaxies for about a century. It's important to recognize what a small amount of time that is. Events like 9/11 seem recent to a lot of us, but that's a quarter of that time. The progress made by humanity in our understanding of the universe in one short century is incredible, especially considering how many years it can take to develop experiments or tools for observation. Still, there's a lot of work left to do. As limited beings without omniscience or the ability to gain perfect knowledge, our only option is to accept our reliance on imperfect and incomplete data and approximate modeling. I believe that because the evidence points to the universe beginning with space-time expansion, implying a beginning to time, it might make no sense to talk about what happened before the Big Bang. It could be an inaccurate application of the human perspective where it cannot apply. If that's not the case, it could be that we can learn about it, but it could also be unknowable. I don't believe there is value in deciding upon an easy answer such as God and calling it a day. In fact, I see this as an unhelpful rejection of the search for truth. For me, ideas about the origin of the cosmos have no immediate implications in everyday life. I don't see them as having the moral or lifestyle implications that Christians assign to them, and while they're interesting, they're not worth getting emotional about. Based on what I hear from Christians, it seems many people find that perspective deeply uncomfortable. People want easy answers that they can feel completely certain are true, and without them, they experience angst. I don't understand the discomfort, because I've never experienced anything like it with regard to these questions. But I can tell that for many people it presents a real difficulty. All I can do is offer my own perspective with no expectation that it will help. Religion offers a very convenient, prepackaged set of answers. Not only to origins, but to everything. I see it as the fast food, or maybe the Amazon delivery of worldviews. Science is not like that. Scientific explanations are not, and are not intended to be, a package of answers delivered to your doorstep, where all you have to do is open the box. Science works because it's founded on humility, an acceptance of our own ignorance and fallibility, and its philosophical techniques and tools are intended to mitigate those failings without letting us forget them. A layman-level presentation of complex scientific topics, such as you might find in a YouTube video or a popular science book, will usually rely on analogies to illustrate something that's only properly represented in math or maybe some other formal way. These analogies relate the concepts to easily visualizable objects from the world of everyday experience, which helps newcomers gain a very basic understanding. This is helpful, but can cause confusion, because it can create the impression that the reality is or should be as intuitive as the analogy. Reality is much weirder than we would believe if we took our everyday experience as a complete representation. What's real is not always simple to understand. I think that you as a Christian probably agree. You likely understand God to be incomprehensible on some level, like how I understand physical reality to be incomprehensible on some level. We're not talking about the same thing, but we would both acknowledge the reality of something far beyond us that cannot be fully grasped. As such, the development of our understanding of nature has been long and slow. Millions of people have spent billions of hours doing work resulting in billions of written pages. It would be impossible to count all the arguments, discussions, observations, experiments, and calculations that have gone into this collaborative effort. It's an arduous process of developing models which approximate reality in the finest detail possible, with increasing accuracy over time, approaching but never reaching perfection. Discoveries stem from previous discoveries, and often improve our understanding in ways that invalidate aspects of the previous understanding. This does not mean that the previous understanding lacked value, since in many cases it was a necessary step to attain that improvement. This is what's meant by standing on the shoulders of giants. An approximation of reality is refined over time and possibly superseded by a different one with better predictive and explanatory power. As such, the criticism theists often levy at science, that scientific theories can be invalidated, is in fact science's greatest strength, the key feature that's necessary for the process to function correctly. Scientific answers do not appear via divine revelation in a final perfect form. What you see in a simplified summary of a scientific idea is a low-resolution image of a small area of surface waves on a vast ocean. It must, by necessity, leave almost everything out, and simplify the rest almost to the point of misrepresentation. This is not done out of dishonesty, but to try to explain the gist to someone without the foundational knowledge to understand it in more detail. This is why at a glance it can seem odd and unbelievable. If you want a better image, that ocean is there for you to explore freely, as many Christians do. Take the time and you'll realize that what seems absurd on the surface is more serious than you expect. That does not mean that comprehending the entire ocean would grant you some final, eternally correct, all-encompassing answer. That is not the function of scientific inquiry. It's not expected or intended. Science proceeds from a different view of knowledge, in which uncertainty is taken for granted. Those who fail to approach science on those terms, and instead take its tentative answers as absolute and unquestionable, display an attitude not so different from that which underlies religion. Science is not finished, nor will or should it be. From the perspective of someone uninvolved, it can be easy to think that the investigation is taking too long, and that if there's going to be an answer, it must be fairly obvious, and the investigators should just come out with it already. People want to resolve all of their uncertainty right now. They're emotionally troubled by the wait, and would prefer a wrong answer now to a right answer later or never. I don't understand it. Is our interest in truth, or is truth secondary to artificial instant gratification? Maybe given time I could convince myself that some shoddily justified answer is correct, and that the pursuit of truth has ended. What would that bring me? The feeling that I know something I don't, about something with little to no practical relevance to my life. Questions about the nature and origin of the cosmos are interesting, but I've never experienced a day where resolving those mysteries would have changed much. If I found curiosity acutely painful, as some people seem to, maybe I would have a different opinion. Question the 6th. Can you explain the origin of life, order, and design without God? The answer to question 5 can roughly function as my answer on the origin of life too, although life, being chemistry that can be studied directly in a lab, is less mysterious, and much of it is well understood. There's no final, perfect answer to exactly when, where, and how it occurred on Earth, and there won't be, because science is about models which incorporate all the evidence satisfactorily and can be used in prediction. This process continually pushes towards a better alignment with reality, but is not intended to reach the point of certainty. Order and design, I assume, refers to the development of life beyond its origin, be it chemical, theistic, or otherwise. This is much less mysterious. It also isn't nearly as troubling to current Christian sensibilities as an unguided chemical origin might be. As such, evolution, like everything in science, is not an atheist belief, and does not contradict God. The only problems this creates for Christianity are problems Christians create themselves. For example, by insisting upon literalist interpretations of the Bible in which God created the universe 6,000 years ago. Many scientists working in fields related to evolution are committed Christians who find no incompatibility here. Contrary to the assertions of the Hovens and Hams, God's word can be plausibly understood in more than one way. If you want to dismiss my position because I mentioned evolution, fair enough, go ahead. But accept the following important clarifications. Evolution is often misunderstood, and talked about as though it's something it's not. Understanding these basics will upgrade your apologetic abilities. Evolution is not chance. Natural selection is a process of adaptive systems conforming to their environment, similarly to how water conforms to a glass. Water does not take the shape of the glass by chance, or indeed by direct action of God, but by physical cause and effect. Life, while more complicated, is similar by analogy. Evolution is not goal-directed. Humanity is not the end or the pinnacle of evolution. There's no ladder climbing from lower to higher organisms. There's no up or down direction. The only direction is forward in time. Evolution is not individual organisms turning into different species. The offspring is the same species as its parents, with few differences. Speciation does not somehow cause the extinction of other species. Why are monkeys still monkeys shows that the speaker does not understand the conversation. Survival of the fittest is not a eugenicist dog whistle. It's a statement of trivial, even tautological fact, with which you already agree. That which is better able to survive and reproduce is better able to survive and reproduce. Some organisms are highly specialized for a single environment. Some are more generalized and can more easily handle changes to their environment. Some are individualistic, showing interest only in getting food into their mouths, while others are more social, thriving through cooperation with others. Some are even symbiotic, coming to rely totally on a different species for their survival, which in return may also rely on them. There's no single correct way to be fit for survival. Surviving until reproduction is the only metric for success, and there are so many species because there are so many different ways to achieve this success. Contrary to the claims of creationists, genetic information changes with every generation of all sexually reproducing species. The human mutation rate results in dozens of novel mutations in each person. The genetic shuffling resulting from sexual reproduction creates new genetic combinations and thus higher genetic diversity within populations, which is the basic requirement for natural selection. Evolution is generally not that important to people who accept it. It's rare that any aspect of it is taken as a moral imperative or a justification for anything. It's mostly just seen as another boring scientific idea. Evolution has a strong effect on the behavior of organisms, and it's responsible for the basic configuration of the human brain, which inclines us towards social behavior and the moralizing that comes along with our style of sociality, in combination with symbolic thought. However, it makes no direct moral demands. It does not oblige us to act in some evolutionarily correct way. That phrase is meaningless. Murder, rape, and theft are not somehow better according to evolution, nor do they make a population more fit, as if they're the one and only functional survival strategy in the universe. The human interest in morality, in other words, constructive social behavior, is a natural evolutionary adaptation. It's part of our fitness for survival, and largely responsible for the impressive success of our species. All those city lights you can see from space wouldn't be possible without it. We are heavily primed by our adaptive history to assign value, moral weight, reasons, and agency to things and events. All of this behavior is socially oriented and highly advantageous, and all of it contributed to us being in the position we find ourselves in today. Humans need groups to thrive as individuals, and there's no reason to think that random murder, rape, and theft increase the survival and reproductive prospects of the average individual more than the social dividends of maintaining strong bonds, or at least avoiding outright hatred. Question 7. Do you believe in objective truths? Yes. All of my videos revolve around the importance of objective truth. The careless disregard for truth is part of what frustrated me enough about Christianity to start making videos. Atheists, like most people, usually believe in objective truth. There are some philosophers who reject the concept, with sometimes interesting arguments that I don't find very convincing, but this is not the predominant opinion of atheists or any other major group. It would make no sense for atheists to criticize religion on the grounds of its objective falsehood if they rejected objective truth and falsehood. In fact, atheists online tend to be unusually hyper-focused on truth, so it can be surprising when atheists are accused of not believing in objective truth. Rejecting what Christians claim is true is not the same as rejecting truth itself. I think this confusion about atheists stems primarily from two sources. Theists tend to associate truth with God, and think of them as inseparable or even identical concepts. This can result in an assumption that a denial of God is a denial of truth. Confusion also arises from rhetorical associations created by Christians, sometimes out of intentional dishonesty and sometimes out of ignorance, that elements of various philosophical viewpoints, anti-realist, postmodernist, relativist, constructivist, anti-representationalist, and so on, have some specific connection to atheism, and that atheists must therefore hold to them. Atheism does not imply, require, or originate from any of these, and there are plenty of atheists who reject them for reasons similar to those by which we reject theism or any other idea. That an atheist can accept an idea does not mean he must or will. Truth refers to accurate representation of reality, typically either in verbal language or as understanding within the mind. And this is where one philosophical objection comes in, because language must be interpreted by the mind of the listener or reader, and mental representation is unique to the mind, and neither can represent reality in a direct and stable way independent of the individual mind and its characteristics. In other words, statements alone don't succeed or fail at comporting with reality themselves, because they don't have meaning on their own. They only have the meaning interpreted into them by a subject. There's some truth in this idea, but it doesn't compel me to discard the concept of truth. Likewise, I don't accept that there can be multiple truths. Your truth and my truth. Whether this is the claim that two contradictory statements can accurately describe the same aspect of reality at the same time in the same sense, or that two people can not just experience reality differently, but actually experience two different realities, or that the truth of statements depends wholly on the interpreter and has no meaningful connection to external reality at all, I reject it. While propositions are always imperfect representations, and their interpretation is always affected by the interpreter's perspective and grasp of the interpretive process, they're still representations, which can achieve more or less consistent results when the intended rules of interpreting or decoding them are followed. Writing can encode information or instructions by which complex real-world results can be achieved, despite the author and the reader being separated by thousands of years or miles. Decoding them does require subjective interpretation, but well-written instructions, decoded according to the intended set of linguistic rules, will objectively achieve the intended results, and poorly written or wrongly interpreted ones won't. To deny representative accuracy and therefore truth would make this phenomenon inexplicably mysterious. None of this requires a god. All that it requires is a reality, and a mind with the ability to model that reality. This is the primary thing that humans are evolved to do, as a matter of survival. Our speech and writing are our attempts to encode those models of reality into a transmissible form. Unfortunately, it's not always easy to tell if our beliefs really are true and qualify as knowledge. Our perceptions, memories, and reasoning can be deceptive. Our beliefs must be true to qualify as knowledge, but we can only access justifications that make them seem true, not a cosmic answer sheet that tells us if they are in fact true. It may seem paradoxical, but this means that if the goal is to avoid being wrong, it's necessary to admit the possibility of being wrong. Otherwise, we'll ignore the problems that can lead to wrong beliefs, resulting in a gradual corruption of our worldview as beliefs that do not comport well with reality begin to take up more space in our web of beliefs. Question 8. Do you believe in objective morals? No. Morality is a term for the social expectations that humans have for ourselves and for each other, which we take seriously enough to treat as roughly universal. These usually line up nicely with our priorities and interests. And since there are always different competing priorities and interests in a society, we spend a lot of time arguing about morality, especially on the finer points of detail. While there are views of objective morality that are compatible with atheism, I don't think it makes any sense in principle, and I see no evidence supporting its existence or relevance to reality. Human action seems entirely predicated on opinion, rooted in our nature, culture, and experience. We can objectively determine which actions or moral precepts push us towards or away from preferred outcomes, but those outcome preferences are themselves the foundation of morality, and they are subjective, hence subjective morality. Christians of all moral stripes treat objective morality reverently, as among the most important of all concepts. Many of them believe it's crucial to the functioning of any civilization that it answers yes to your question. Apparently, it's absolutely necessary for civilization to survive and thrive that everyone treats some form of Christian morality as universal and endorsed by the fundamental reality. Which of the many Christian moralities must be universal depends mostly on when and where the Christian espousing this opinion grew up and what church he went to. If nothing else, I appreciate the acknowledgement of the importance of results. A single universal Christian morality was a comfortable fantasy once upon a time in Europe, but always bulging at the seams and becoming truly untenable after the 30 Years' War shattered any pretense of a shared Christian mindset. It's harder still to take it seriously today with exposure to the broad range of cultures around the world, which have political, religious, and local cultural histories as complex and serious as that of Christian Europe. I think that your personal version of Christianity is itself a repudiation of the notion of some unalterable Christian morality. I assume you're Protestant, and I know you're a modern American, with a morality that's distinctly a product of its time and place in ways you probably don't realize. Although you may think it was delivered directly to you by God, it was not, and instead is based on whichever ideas you picked up along the way that sounded reasonable to you, if you were old enough to evaluate them at all. Your objective Christian morality is one in a huge constellation of supposedly objective Christian moralities, ranging in scope from the level of the sect down to the individual. This doesn't mean that there can't be one objective morality that's real and from God. However, it makes it challenging to take it as seriously as Christians do, or to believe that if it is real, it has much, if any, applicability to the real world, or that it's even truly accessible to the beings within it. It seems as if, regardless of whether there are objective moral facts that are true regardless of anyone's opinions, humans are still just making it up as we go along, or receiving it from our cultural history, our communities, our political situations, the media, and so on. If some moral precepts are objectively correct, that seems not to do much for us in the here and now. Maybe we'll find out the correct answer after we die, but that's useless now. From this perspective, although some may find the question of an objectively correct morality interesting on a philosophical basis, it seems to lack real-world importance. If the moral facts are difficult or impossible to accurately determine, it's difficult to achieve anything with them. When people insist that their morality is objective, it looks like an attempt to add weight to their own subjective opinions when they want to bludgeon other people with them. You end up with the countless contradictory sects of all the contradictory religions battling each other armed with all their different, absolutely certainly objectively correct contradictory moralities. It's entertaining to watch as an outsider, but that's all the value it has. I think that my view, aside from being true, is useful. The world is composed of entities with interests and priorities which sometimes align and sometimes compete, and sometimes briefly achieve a delicate balance which is eventually disrupted again. The priority is on not letting this get out of hand in undesirable ways that affect us too heavily. Christians seem deeply afraid of this view. Apparently, unless we proclaim our moral standards objectively correct, we can't maintain basic civility. This is the tunnel vision of people so focused on religious thinking that they fail to notice their own feelings. You don't condemn actions in cold obeisance to God's orders. You actually feel your revulsion or approval. This is the result of countless generations of your ancestors adapting to their social existence, and every input that has affected your highly plastic brain throughout your life. The general moral views of an atheist therefore typically have a lot in common with those of a theist from a similar background. Our interpretation of events revolves heavily on a deep neurological level around our social instinct. This is at the root of the strong feelings that nearly all humans feel when receiving positive or negative responses from others. Obviously, when we're subject to encouragement or shame from others, we respond predictably. But more interesting is the fact that the others aren't always needed. The brain of an adult is very familiar with how social interactions tend to work in the society into which it was raised. When a person performs an action, it tends to be evaluated internally before anyone else has a chance to respond. In a way, the brain simulates the social environment and reacts to the results by producing the emotion that those social interactions would provoke. This is the conscience. This anticipation of social possibilities by the brain extends also to phenomena like empathy, the ability to understand and, to a degree, feel the feelings of other people. We can't read their minds, of course, or literally feel their feelings, but we've had experiences of our own, sometimes in similar situations. We can reproduce what we felt then to approximate in ourselves what the other person might be feeling. Most people, most of the time, will have no interest in acting in seriously transgressive ways. And if they do have such an interest, the natural inhibitions of a social animal will usually suffice to restrain them from acting upon it. Gaining an intuition for social standards, and how to predict responses to actions on the basis of them, requires a long period of conditioning within a society, which for children is similar to and about as easy as learning a language. To raise a child is to clarify these expectations and emphasize their importance. And since humans are evolutionarily primed to adapt to our social environment while young, the same way we're primed to adapt to our linguistic one, children generally adapt easily to these boundaries. For adults, it's much more difficult and more emotionally charged than language learning. The fact of different languages of interaction can make it uncomfortable to enter a new social environment, such as visiting a country with a different cultural past, because it's possible to be seen as committing significant social transgressions even when attempting to avoid them. The mental simulation of social results or the mental states of others, which might feel easy and obvious at home, no longer feels easy or obvious. This is part of what's called culture shock. The difference between me and a typical Christian is that I see conscience, empathy, pride, shame, guilt, and other correlates of morality as unsurprising features of an extremely social brain, while the Christian ascribes them to God, or the morality he wrote on our hearts. Either way, this shows that the text of the Bible has little influence on most of us, since we'll absorb and develop moral opinions regardless. Although Christians often claim to take the Bible as their moral authority, they mostly don't. When they try to, it can be uncomfortable when they discover that their morality, written on their heart by God, does not always conform to the text. The Christian view says that accountability can be cast onto someone else, much like swinging a chicken over your head 3 times to transfer your sins into it and then slaughtering it. Despite accepting this consequence-free shirking of accountability as the foundation of their religion, Christians often deride a social form of morality as lacking accountability. Accountability is as real as any other social phenomenon when it's based in society and the self. In my experience, Christians are highly disturbed by this because it's imperfect and does not always attain their desired outcomes. On page 40 of your book, God Is, after describing the worst crime your imagination could conjure, you write, "Do you really believe that they're going to get away with that? I most definitely do not think so. I believe that there is a final judgment, and I believe that there is an eternal place of punishment called hell for those people. Life would never be worth living if there were no God, no hope, and nothing to hold on to. Life apparently becomes valueless without the actual reality of an inaccessible, invisible place beyond the veil of death, where those who violate moral precepts are thought to be punished. I don't understand the emotional desperation here. Why would the value of your life be altered if something you never see never happens to someone you never met? Or if you were the victim, and you would have seen the punishment had it occurred, why would the value of your own life plummet to zero if that punishment were called off? Why is a life's value contingent on what happens in a different life? Besides which, Christian morality says that sin was not committed against humanity, or even against the apparent victims. It was committed only against God. In that case, it's between God and the sinner, and is none of your concern. It's not even clear what you would be held accountable for. Do you believe in salvation by works or salvation by faith? If by faith, then if the killer ended up in hell, it would be for a lack of faith, not the act he committed. The act might be claimed to demonstrate a lack of faith, but the act is not the condition for damnation. The condition is his lack of faith, or at best, if I give ground to the framing of the apologists, the fact of his sin in general, including original sin. He's punished for the same reason a kindly atheist grandma would be. There's no unique accountability for the crime itself. All sins are supposed to be of equal infinite severity, and therefore all deserve an eternity in hell, in which case all sins, no matter how minor, including the original sin that stained you thousands of years before your birth, make you not only subject to equal punishment, but exactly as bad as the extreme murderer described in God Is. The only thing that gets you into heaven is being saved from your own infinite evil. All sins can be washed away the same way, by accepting Christ's sacrifice. And if the perpetrator does so, he will spend eternity in heaven, not hell. This is the accountability that defines your life's worth? If instead you're saved by your works, then which works lead to damnation and which don't? The only options are infinite punishment or none. How do we determine which sins will result in which? Where exactly is the line between sins that count as permitted and prohibited? How can this be discovered in a way that's clear to everyone? Why do believers disagree about this so often? Why is it so difficult to determine this, even from the Bible, despite God supposedly trying to tell us how to avoid hell? How can we even validate that anyone is being held accountable at all when the accountability is hidden and the distinctions between the damned and the saved are so unclear that they might be entirely arbitrary? Are we expected to rely on our imaginations to satisfy the revenge fantasies that make our lives worth living? If this is considered satisfactory by Christians, so be it. But to me, it's madness. Question 9. If so, could you explain an objective absolute standard beyond humanity? The standard for truth beyond humanity is reality. In a way, truth is collaborative between humanity and reality, since for truth to occur, humans need to craft representations of reality that are accurate in some way. Truth is human understanding measured against the reality being understood. I don't think there is a standard for morality beyond humanity. When we define a standard, we can objectively measure actions against it, but the standard is based solely on subjective preference. This also applies to other human evaluations of reality, such as beauty, value, and so on. And finally, question 10. Lastly, would you be willing to seek God one last time if you had the chance? I'm not interested in spending time shopping around for religions like I see some people do. That would require me to feel an emotional yearning for something to fill a void. It implies starting with a conclusion. Today I want Buddhism to be true, and working backwards, wishfully using the emotions generated from ritual behaviors to fill in the path to the conclusion. Whatever discontented feeling it is that people strive to resolve, I don't have it. I'm in a relationship and not seeking another one. I don't see the value in suspending reason in favor of emotion, and I don't think I'm in the target market for that sort of thing. However, I am interested in discovering if there is a God. It would be fascinating knowledge and important. So far, I haven't seen anything that I can take seriously that points to any truth lying in that direction. I understand that you see this in a different way. As a Christian, it seems obvious that people should try to manipulate themselves into becoming Christian, because that's how the religion depicts the process of discovery. You and I have followed very different paths, and come to very different conclusions about how knowledge is obtained. In my opinion, this practice of seeking God and then gradually beginning to feel that he's real is an exploitation of the foibles of the human mind for the purpose of self-deception. I'm not interested. It's possible that I'm just closed-minded in finding this invitation to be an unreasonable, time-wasting request. So if you disagree, are you willing to spend a few years trying out the rituals of Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Sikhism, ancient Roman paganism, Scientology, and so on, to see if they produce superior emotional satisfaction and feelings of certainty? Would you then try to convince yourself that God doesn't exist and that all of my ideas are true, to see if that fits better? Remember, if you don't get amazing results with each one of these, that just means you didn't seek hard enough for long enough. This is not nearly as reasonable as Christians make it out to be. This is a way to shortcut the challenging responsibility to provide evidence in the hopes that a few gullible people might convert solely on the basis of feelings. I see right through that. I will compromise, though. If we ever meet, I'll come with you to church and pray with you. Or if you like, we can do something like that in a live stream. This was a lengthy read, or listen, that likely took some time. I think it's reasonable for me to give a similar amount of time in return. For now, I believe I'm on the path best able to approach the truth. After all this, I'm sure you still disagree, but maybe you at least understand my perspective a little better. I liked these questions a lot. I respect these questions. This was cool. It's nice that we seem to be moving in a direction where we can just talk about ideas without being adversarial about it, despite deep disagreements. Maybe I'll shoot some questions back in return, I don't know. If you have ideas for questions I should ask, leave them in the comments. Respectful ones, please. Anyway, thank you everyone for being here with me. If you would, before you go, please do give the video a like and click subscribe if you haven't. And if you like the channel, maybe consider supporting. A few bucks a month is enormously helpful, and huge thanks to all of my supporters who've already made that choice. For early access, email list.logicked.com, and I'll see you next time.